So this is going to be more of a lecture with a pair of reviews appended onto the end of it than really a straightforward pair of reviews. I'm going to try, if I can remember, try to provide a time code link down there in the description or up there, wherever it is, so you can skip directly to the tasting notes and stuff if that's all you're interested in. But I wanted to give this one some context first. I've been wanting to review these for a while because they represent fairly inexpensive and distillate forward examples of distilleries that just don't get a lot of bottling here in the U.S. You do see Glencadam has a range, but Ben Nevis in particular, I think we're still waiting for the regular 10-year-old, the official bottlings to roll back in. And there's some stuff for the 90s that is just extortionately expensive, and these are not expensive. These are both south of $50. But I've held off on reviewing them, and there's reason for that. And I thought rather than just kind of carry on with it, I would take some time to contextualize these reviews, and it has to do with why reviewing spirits, just in general, is a difficult thing to do, if not absolutely impossible. And it's not necessarily for the reason you think it might be, which is the supposed problem that taste is subjective, taste is extremely personal. It's much more because of what we would now lump under the sort of broad term income inequality. So let me explain why I think all this is. So the taste is subjective, taste is personal thing. Obviously I'm willing to accept that up to a certain point, but it's also a principle that I tend to get a little worried about. What worries me is that it tends to get deployed in conversations in defense of very large businesses and very large brands selling, stuff to folks, which is just costs more than what it's worth as compared to comparable products. In conversations, the way this usually goes is someone will, say something mean about, big brand product X, and sometimes you'll see accusations of outright snobbery. That's actually seemed to have gotten less common recently. The much more sophisticated attack is to say, well, there's something sort of philosophically wrong with the very idea of trying to make a judgment of taste. You're misunderstanding what taste is. You're trying to see qualities of beauty or ugliness or whatever in this brand X bottling, when really there is no such thing, and it's all personal taste, and we all recognize that there are huge differences in personal taste. So just let people enjoy what they want, and by the way, that happens to involve enjoying the richest of the richest companies and the stuff they crank out. So there's that problem. There's the way that sort of argument is deployed, but which I worry about a lot. You never see people making that sort of broad statement when someone is saying something bad about a brand new tiny craft distillery. That's no one says, hey, you can't complain about the craft distillery because everyone has their own taste. You see what I mean? The thing is, it's also just a kind of a lazy argument to deploy, to say, the very idea of reviewing something, of making an aesthetic judgment, which is supposed to apply in some kind of broader way, is just wrong-headed or some kind of category mistake. It's a certain kind of valid skeptical point within its reason. It just, why should we necessarily conclude that the fact that taste is personal and taste is subjective to the fact that we can't establish any sorts of norms or what Hume would call standards of taste? So quick digression. I just want to, this isn't really sort of the direct thing I want to talk about, but I want to be able to link to this if anyone, if it ever comes up in conversation. So we're going to deal with this now. The question of what Hume would call the standard of taste. He wrote an essay about this. It's in this big, thick book. You can find it online. It's all, he wrote in English. It's all public domain at this point. You can find. I will probably link a copy down there. Hume, of all people, has reason to say, taste is subjective. Taste is extremely personal. Taste is not in the objects themselves. Hume is, as Kant says somewhere or other, grounds his philosophical problems on the safe shores of skepticism. He is coming from a tradition which starts with Descartes, doubting the existence of external bodies, and then trying to win that back by way of argumentation, up through Malebranche and other characters like him, rejecting the arguments for the existence of external bodies, up through folks like George Berkeley, saying not only are there no external bodies, but we have no need of such things, up to Hume saying, basically what we have access to is our immediate perceptions. That's what we got. We got our customs and our beliefs sort of grounded on that. And, whatever the heck is going on outside, we're never going to know about it. All those perceptions and stuff, that's enough for us to correct what we're doing, and that's good enough. This is good enough for us. What's interesting about Hume is he's a skeptic, but he always uses that skepticism as a starting point for further considerations. Never as something to sort of land on and then be done. It's always, given what we have access to, what kind of conclusions can we draw? That's much more interesting. And so when he starts talking about the question of the standard of taste, and it's an essay with that's problematic in lots of ways, as lots of stuff written during the height of British imperialism, but still very useful, and I think in principle still bright. He starts off with the point everyone is going to no aesthetic qualities are not in the objects, they're in the perception, our perception of them, they're in our judgment of them. But from there he's able to make sort of hop over and just say, well, okay, fine. Well, that's if all we have access to is our perceptions, our reactions, our judgments. Why can't we just make the question about them? In other words, why can't we turn things around and ask, not about a standard of, beauty in the objects or something, but about a standard of taste, of a standard of aesthetic judgment, what we would now call, sort of the norms, for reviewing or judging, say whiskey or spirits or anything like that. Turn the question around and ask about judgment, not about the thing itself, because are there standards of judgment we can come up with? And so what you're looking for is a way of filtering down to get the right kind of judgments you want, which Hume thinks should be fairly rare. And what he finally concludes is there should be what he calls, and he doesn't get very specific. This is about principle, not about establishing a program to develop a standard of taste. It's about could you even do it if you wanted to. What he says, and I'm going to read the passage, is what you would need is people with a certain quality of character, strong sense, united to delicate sentiment, improved by practice, perfected by comparison, and cleared of all prejudice, can alone entitle critics to this valuable character. And the joint verdict of such, wherever they are to be found, is the true standard of taste and beauty. So you cannot, it's not just anyone we're talking about. We're talking about particularly sensitive people who have a lot of experience with the thing they're supposed to be judging, who have a broad range of comparing things around, who are able to correct for what Hume calls bias and authority. More on those later. Which doesn't mean having no bias, because bias is a condition from being able to make aesthetic judgments of this sort. Go read Gadamer. But it means being able to, kind of correct for who you is. And more than that, it requires having a bunch of these characters and having them talk to each other, talk about the same thing, and try to arrive at some kind of consensus. Hold on, let me get some water. Now, that's not supposed to be easy, but the thought is, in principle, you could do it. How would how would someone establish themselves as a true judge of this sort? Hume's a little bit vague, but I mean, I think we see it in the online sphere all the time. Someone makes a risky call about something, that hasn't been noticed by other people yet, or is kind of taken for granted. They make a risky call about it. Others start to look in. They notice this, this cat is right, and then that gives you a certain amount of credit, and it ends up what you end up is less like you're in the circle, as there's a kind of evolving conversation about one's trustworthiness in judging certain kinds of things. But in principle, I think that's sort of how it works. Could you say, well, I mean, this isn't having a circle, a community of true judges is by no means a foolproof thing. There's nothing stopping, it being corrupted. There's nothing stopping, a circle of thieves keeping out certain perspectives and having their own, tastes being systematically wrong in some important way. That can absolutely happen. But hey, that can happen in pretty much any human institution. So, you just, that's how he is, right? And if you're unhappy with that and you want something to sort of fall from on high, go find religion or something. That's not how any of this works. What you want, the best you can be able to do is people defending and taking seriously the integrity of the institution of judging spirits or whatever it is. And that's the work of not only following the rules of how this should work, but perhaps at the expense of one's own status sometimes, and also enforcing that with others requires a certain kind of commitment to the culture, the institution, what my old teacher John Hoagland used to call existential commitment. That's a longer conversation. In any case, that's just how it goes. It doesn't mean that you can't have some kind of standard of taste, if you like. It just means it's always open-ended. The conversation never ends, and it's hard to keep this stuff sort of to keep the integrity that it has to survive and continue being serious. So that's okay. That's my rant on that. But back to the question of, but that's just to say that this is, it's perfectly possible to establish, not to say what everyone will find good or delicious or wonderful or whatever, but to at least, because again, that's personal, but at least to establish some norms, to establish some kind of firm starting points, firm points of reference to go to at a given time. Those will always change. Those will never be firm, but that's, we're not asking for that. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for just, where do we get started? That's all you need. And so the bigger problem isn't the principle of could you even do that? The sort of, is it a category mistake to even try to publish reviews online or make comments on stuff online? The bigger question is one of fact. Is it possible to actually pull that off? And the difficulty involves basically income inequality right now. There are a tiny handful of people with enormous amounts of money, and a lot of people who are sort of living paycheck to paycheck. That creates a particular kind of problem for reviewing. To explain this, let me go back to the 70s and to a Maryland lawyer named Robert Parker and Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader, we probably best remember. This is the second part of the lecture. I haven't poured these yet. Back to Ralph Nader in a second. I'm going to pour a little bit of these. Give them a little water. Just open them up. I'm not going to do a second run through these. We'll just go once. Look, look, look. Oh, lovely smells. All right, so Ralph Nader we probably best remember as that guy who ran for president in 2000 as a third-party candidate, and who was basically, in retrospect, right about everything, but we still kind of feel awkward about him anyways. Long before then, he had become sort of the figurehead, the star figure of consumer advocacy. He, attacked automobile safety early on, kind of caught on following, and was on the board of Consumer Reports for a while. And among many, many other things that he accomplished, he sort of got into the mainstream this idea that, well, most of the time when consumers are, that was David Hume falling on the ground, when consumers are getting information about the industry or about a product, they're getting it from forces owned by the industry, co-opted by the industry. In the best case, with questionable ties to the industry, rather than someone independent whose only authority is the consumers themselves. In the 1970s, Robert Parker was reading this stuff and paying attention. Nader, Consumer Reports, and in '78 he started up his own little newsletter called Wine Advocate. Now, his was not the first, wine magazine out there. Spectator beat him by a couple of years, Wine Spectator. The thing is, Wine Spectator was... and I poured Glencadam all over myself. Oh well. All right, let me pick this up. Oh. Wine Spectator was always kind of basically a tabloid. Glass did not break, you will notice. Wine Spectator has had a lot of problems over the years. Wine Advocate was an entirely different design in principle. Accepted no advertising, all reviews were to be done sort of as independently as possible. The money they were getting was from the subscribers directly. Let's re-pour this. And do my squirt again. So the principle was, the subscribers, the consumers, the people would basically be paying directly for the information they were receiving from the reviewers, the editors, the reporters, right? So, you're cutting out the industry. The industry is the thing being talked about, but they do not have, they don't have the power to sort of lean on proceedings. Now, and the industry of beverage press since then has been trying to, in some ways, follow that example, or at least, wave that flag. Now, has Robert Parker himself, lived up to that? I would say absolutely not. The list of Robert Parker's scandals is a mile long. But in principle, this idea of a structure which is only, in service to the consumer, of that sort of system of consumer pays the people to, pays the people doing the information gathering and processing and, distribution, that seems to me right on. That's the structure you need in order to have this work. And you will notice that as people have been getting poorer and poorer and poorer to the point where they can no longer afford their usual bottle of wine, much less afford to pay someone, a magazine, to give them information about their wine, suddenly, either you have to start firing the people doing those reviews, or you have to start getting your money elsewhere, right? And this is what you see go look at, the vast majority of spirits press these days. You will see immediately, who are they are in service to, basically. No question. Now, the fact that things are online now has given you as close, in one way, as close as you could possibly want as to, if not a community of true judges, then at least a community of reviewers who are all talking to each other, who are all sort of drawing on each other to sort of try new things, confirm each other's views to sort of, you know, establish some kind of consensus, or you know, establish some sorts of, you know, various sorts of differences. The problem with that is there are a few people who are, you know, have jobs that pay them enough money, or who are, you know, independently wealthy, or, you know, people who have, you know, patrons like King Ralphie, right? Ralphie is able to do what he does entirely through his Patreon pals, and that's great. That's how this should be, right? But he's only one guy, and you need, you know, a consensus, a community to get a full perspective, or at least not a full perspective, a more comprehensive perspective. The result is, I would say the vast majority of reviewers you see are in the industry somewhere. So they are adjacent, at least adjacent to the people who are making and selling, you know, the spirits that they are reviewing. And that's a problem. It means even if they are doing, you know, the honest work of kind of trying to correct their bias and correct against the authority, you know, they know these people. They like these people. Even if the same people don't necessarily, you know, have the leverage of, you know, the next paycheck that can help them pay their rent and their bills, you know, in their hand, which is, this is all powerful stuff, and do not ignore it. And the thing is, I work in the industry too. I sell booze for a living. That's where I get my paychecks. I have tried to correct that as best I can, but you can't always, right? And that brings me to these bottlings from House of Glunz. I used to work at House of Glunz, and I know the people who are bringing this in. Barbara Glunz, really terrific old hand in the wine industry, taught me everything I know about wine buying. Christopher Donovan, her son, who's also the spirit buyer, is a terrific Scotch nerd, and I give him enormous credit for sticking to Scotch when, given, you know, the history of Glunz, he has every justification to source some bourbon from somewhere, stick the Glunz label onto it, and throw it on the shelf. No, he's been bringing in Scotch. But, you know, so I know these people. I worked for these people. They were the ones who picked me up as a out of work grad student and sort of gave me a second career of sorts. Now, since then, I've moved to a larger, slightly geographically closer store where I sell wine for a living, not spirits. And so if you've been wondering why I don't talk about wine more on this channel and why I've sort of pretty much focused it on spirits, it's because of that. It's because I really want to avoid conflicts of interest. But in this case, like, I had enough, I like these enough, and I think I want to sort of shine enough, I want enough to shine a spotlight on these particular bottlings that I'm going to risk sort of, you know, having my bias come through. So that's the deal. I mean, so these are from people I used to work for, and I'm going to try to review them as fairly as possible, and it's up to you how seriously you want to take that. All right, so what do we got here? House of Glunz. The Glunz clan is a fairly serious family of booze moguls, I would say, based mostly in Chicago. They do distribution of wine, beer, spirits. They also, one branch is out in California, in Paso, making wine, of all things. But it all started at the House of Glunz wine store and formerly tavern, where Louis Glunz in the 1880s settled down and started to, you know, build a business for himself. This is for the for that old location, that first store, right? So far as I believe, still the oldest continuously operating alcohol sales store in the U.S. They kept open during Prohibition, you know, selling make-your-own wine kits and stuff like that, even while older stores closed, so I think they still count. Anyways, really cool place. If you're ever in Chicago, well worth a check out. Anyhow, so let's get started on these. Ben Nevis, very famous sort of southwestern Highlander, versus Glencadam, sort of from the eastern Highlands near, Glengarry, some of those others, a region in Scotch I really, really like, and I love to see this stuff bottled. Glencadam obviously has its own range, which I really should get around to reviewing one of these days. Ben Nevis, again, has been absent from the U.S. for a little while, sadly, at least in officials. And the independents are very expensive, except kind of for this one. So the thought is, both of these 5 years old, both of these bottled at 46%, non-chill filtered, no coloring, from House of Glunz through John McDougall. It's not stated on the bottles, but I do remember seeing on the boxes that these are both 2012 vintages, single malt scotches. So this one, well, let's just go through. Ben Nevis, this is a set of 399 bottles. This is the one I didn't knock over, if you will recall. On the nose, okay, so you're getting a mixture of gummy worms. It's very sort of young, malty, fermentary, which I love. I love these sort of distillate-driven kinds of drams. Gummy worms mixed with like wet wool. So take like some old suits and sort of dip them in water, let them kind of sit out and ferment for a little bit, and then kind of smell them. That's sort of what I'm getting. And a lot of orange. It doesn't say, but I would guess this is an ex-sherry cask. Not a fresh one. This is like maybe third fill, something like that. Because I do get, a lot of the time on fresh sherry casks, or not ex-sherry casks, a kind of orangey note like this. It's a little bit of a marmalade, orange liqueur, Grand Marnier kind of thing. A little oatmeal, and spoon some like Greek yogurt in. A little grapefruit rind, some chamomile tea, black pepper. No, it doesn't have that earthiness. White pepper. Maybe like some mixed nuts, like a walnut and a macadamia, some pine nuts, and like one pear. One kind of like sliced floral aromatic pear. It smells very, malty, with a lot of fun little details and in there, and that sort of like light orange overcoat kind of, or not overcoat, that oranginess kind of shooting through it. And on the palate, we're leading with gummy worms again. Ooh, there's kind of a smoky thing, not peat. This is more like a subtle tobacco note kind of thing, like cigarette smoke, mingled with a little bit of pipe smoke too, maybe some orientals in there. The orange notes are back, like orange and tangerine. Something grainy. Muesli, so like, soaked grainy stuff with some berries and things. Quite fruity, but quite slightly floral, and sort of tobacco smoke driven as well. There's some black tea, like Chinese aromatic black tea. There's something potato-like, like hash browns. Not McDonald's hash browns, like actual chopped, fried, stovetop potato hash browns. Some pear, more like pear cider perry than. curry. What kind of curry? Like a Thai curry, like a massaman curry or something, with a little bit of nuttiness in there. And the finish is surprisingly lengthy for how young this is. This is kind of pushing way back in my mouth, which I'm enjoying. Long, herbaceous, has a kind of like a, you mix a couple of Amaros together kind of finish. Kind of bitter and herbal, but slightly sweet and fruity too. I like this. There's a little hint of black licorice here too. So, there's a little nod towards rum in this. I'm enjoying this. Really, I mean, you gotta like, distillate-driven drams to like this. This is very young. The oak is, aside from that oranginess, is practically just not playing a role here. Well, the oranginess and the fact that this is not, fainty and outright fermentary. But I mean, once you can get past the lack of age, this is terrific. I give this a solid 84 points. And let's move on. Oh dear, my alcohol has left a little stain on the table. The things I do for reviewing culture. Okay, on the nose of my my Glencadam, I'm gonna move my water over here so I don't knock that over too. All right, this is a Glencadam 5-year-old. House of Glunz through John McDougall. 340 bottles on this one, so a little bit less. Also 46% non-chill filtered and natural color. Also, I believe 2012, or at least that's what the boxes said, on the nose. On the nose, much less fruity, actually. Definitely much less orangey. I don't think this is a sherry cask. What I'm really getting is kind of smoked, herbaceous Lucky Charms note. So take some Lucky Charms, put them in a smokehouse, but also like stuff some different herbs in there, and that's kind of what I'm smelling. It's very fruity, actually. There's some floral notes in there, a little lavender coming through. Pears, mixed berries, menthol. Lots of minerality. This is lots of rocks on this. Just like wet rocks. Some fresh leaves, fresh like tree leaves that you just kind of pulled down and smelled. Something about this reminds me of like Alsace, like a really good Cremant from Alsace or something. Sparkling wine. Yeah, that graininess, that kind of mixed with a kind of candied quality, like again, Lucky Charms is kind of what's coming to mind. Little wax, little ginger, a little more of floral action. Interesting, and again, very, very distillate driven. Like the oak is not doing very much here at all. Maybe there's a tiny hint of toasted coconut way in the back there, but it's really what the oak is doing here is just calming down the distillate off the still. It's kind of giving a chance for some of those fainty notes to kind of resolve themselves. On the palate, lots of little fun things going on with this Glencadam. Oh, it gets kind of like hippie toothpaste on the back end. Fennel and mint. Oh, that's lovely. One more time. Yeah, fennel, mint. Dominated again by that sort of smoky minerality though. So like what is that? Like again, wet rocks and kind of whiffs of cigar smoke. Honey, lots of honey in this though. Wildflower honey. Turkish Delight, cream of wheat. Tea, smoked tea, Lapsang Souchong. baklava. It's a little pruniness, like prune juice, and that floral note is back. Black pepper. Young, again, I would think bourbon cask, but I'm not sure. And very solid. I like both of these. I think that I'm going to give Glencadam the edge. I'm going to give it a 84 plus. So give it a plus over the Ben Nevis in this case. I like both of these. I would recommend them. The question is, like, given my connections to the industry and these folks in particular, you know, even given that I'm trying to do my best to control, you know, to correct for my biases, how much do you trust me? And that's a fair question. You can go either way on this. But the thing is, you should be asking that for dang near every review you read on the internet. Doesn't mean no one is trustworthy. It just means, like, we all stuck in this conversation together. We all stuck in this muck, and we got to do the best we can. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Hope this was interesting and helpful and educational in some way or other. And cheers.